I still remember the sound of that knock like it happened yesterday. Not loud, not urgent, just confident. The kind of knock someone gives when they believe they already have authority over you. When I opened the door, a uniformed process server stood on my porch, eyes down, clipboard in hand. He asked my name, confirmed the address, and then handed me a thick envelope stamped with bold, intimidating words. Notice of eviction. For a moment, I genuinely thought it had to be a mistake. I had lived on that property for years. My mortgage was spotless. Taxes paid early. 0 violations. 0 disputes. Or so I thought. The papers claimed I was being removed from my home for ongoing HOA noncompliance, including unpaid fines, unauthorized modifications, and repeated warnings I had supposedly ignored. The total balance? Nearly $30,000. I laughed at first, assuming it was some clerical error or scam. But then I saw the HOA letterhead, the signatures, and finally her name at the bottom. The HOA president. The same woman who had been glaring at me since the day I refused to repaint my mailbox to match her preferred shade of beige. I went inside, spread the papers across the kitchen table, and read every line carefully. That's when the unease set in. These weren't sloppy threats. They were formatted like real court filings. Case numbers, hearing dates, legal language copied straight from state eviction statutes. Whoever put this together knew exactly what they were doing, or at least wanted it to look that way. According to the notice, I had 14 days to vacate or face forced removal. 14 days to lose my home because someone in an HOA office decided to play judge, jury, and executioner. When my wife got home that evening, I handed her the papers without saying a word. She read them silently, page by page. I expected anger, or concern, or at least confusion. Instead, she paused, set the papers down neatly, and looked at me with a very specific expression I had seen before. The one she gets when something doesn't just feel wrong, it is wrong. She asked a single question. Did the HOA actually file this with a court? I told her I had no idea. The papers didn't say. They just implied authority, hoping fear would do the rest. That was when she explained something that changed the entire tone of the situation. These documents weren't just aggressive. They were illegal. In our state, only a court can issue an eviction order. An HOA can fine. They can lien. They can threaten. But they cannot evict someone on their own. And faking legal paperwork? That crossed a very serious line. A line that didn't just lead to civil penalties, but potential criminal charges. Forgery, fraud, abuse of process. I watched the realization spread across her face as she noticed details most people would miss. Incorrect formatting, an outdated statute reference, a clerk's signature that didn't match any active county official. She let out a slow breath and said, very calmly, "These aren't real, but whoever sent them wanted you to think they were." At that moment, the fear I felt earlier evaporated and was replaced with something far more dangerous for the HOA president: confidence. Because what she didn't know yet was this: my wife wasn't just familiar with eviction law. She reviewed cases like this for a living. And soon, this one was going to land directly on her desk. The next morning I did exactly what the HOA president expected me to do. I panicked. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. I called the HOA office, left a voicemail, sent 2 emails, and even showed up in person during business hours. The receptionist told me the president was unavailable, but assured me the eviction was very real and very serious. She said I should start preparing and suggested I consult an attorney. I thanked her politely and left. Every move was deliberate. Behind the scenes, something very different was happening. My wife began pulling court records, filing procedures, and HOA bylaws. Within an hour, she confirmed what she already suspected. No eviction case had been filed. No judge had signed anything. No clerk had processed a complaint. The HOA president had taken a real eviction template, altered it, slapped on official-looking formatting, and weaponized it to scare me out of my own home. It wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. We decided not to confront her immediately. Instead, we documented everything. Screenshots of emails, voicemail recordings, copies of the fake paperwork, even the timestamps showing when the HOA office claimed the eviction had been issued. My wife explained that intent mattered. The president wasn't confused about her authority. She was abusing it, hoping fear would do what law could not. And that distinction was going to matter later. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. This one came directly from the HOA president herself. The tone was smug, almost celebratory. She wrote that I was well aware of my violations and that failure to vacate would result in swift enforcement. She even referenced law enforcement involvement, as if police officers routinely removed homeowners at an HOA's request. It was intimidation, plain and simple, and every sentence dug her deeper. That afternoon, I finally responded.
Short, calm,
Professional. I asked for proof of filing, a stamped court case number, and the name of the presiding judge. I also requested copies of all alleged violation notices and fine assessments. Within minutes, I received a reply telling me to stop playing games and comply. No documents. No proof. Just bluster. That email became Exhibit A. What she didn't know was that the fake eviction had already triggered mandatory reporting procedures. Judges are required to report suspected fraudulent filings, even when they aren't formally submitted. And since my wife reviewed housing-related matters for the county, she followed protocol to the letter. She submitted the documents for review, flagged the misuse of court formatting, and recused herself from any future involvement once the matter became official. Everything was clean. Everything was proper. By the end of the week, the HOA president received a very different letter than the one she sent me. This one came from the county clerk's office. It informed her that fraudulent eviction documents bearing court likeness had been identified and were under investigation. It requested an explanation, originals, and correspondence related to their distribution. Suddenly, her confidence vanished. The emails stopped. The calls stopped. Even the HOA website quietly removed the enforcement update section where my name had briefly appeared. Neighbors started whispering. Board members began distancing themselves. Because once fake court papers enter the picture, this isn't HOA drama anymore. It's a legal firestorm. And it was just getting started. I kept living normally, mowing the lawn and checking the mail, while pressure mounted quietly behind closed doors. Every delay, every silence, made her situation worse. She had tried to scare me out. Instead, she invited scrutiny she could never control from multiple authorities simultaneously. The silence from the HOA didn't last long. It never does when panic sets in. A week after the clerk's letter went out, the HOA president suddenly became very active again, but not with me. She started calling emergency board meetings, sending late-night emails marked urgent, and quietly consulting an attorney of her own. Neighbors told me the parking lot outside the clubhouse was full on a Tuesday night, lights blazing long past midnight. Whatever confidence she'd been faking before was gone. That's when the narrative started to change. Instead of insisting I was being evicted, the HOA shifted to claiming the notice was only a warning and that it had been misinterpreted. They said it was never meant to look official, never meant to be enforced, never meant to scare anyone. Unfortunately for them, the document said the exact opposite. It used mandatory language,
deadlines,
consequences, and worst of all, it cited statutes that didn't even apply to HOAs. Anyone with basic legal knowledge could tell it was designed to impersonate the court. My wife explained something important around this time. Judges don't like being impersonated. Clerks don't like their seals being copied. And counties absolutely do not like private organizations pretending they have judicial authority. This wasn't a civil misunderstanding anymore. It was potential fraud, and fraud has teeth. A few days later, two things happened almost simultaneously. First, a board member I barely knew knocked on my door. He was nervous, polite, and clearly uncomfortable. He said the president had acted alone, and that the board had no idea she'd sent eviction papers. He asked, carefully, whether I'd be willing to resolve this internally. No investigation. No authorities. Just a quiet apology, and maybe a fine reversal. I told him I appreciated the honesty, but it was out of their hands now. The process had started. The second thing was much less friendly. The HOA president herself sent me an email accusing me of conflict of interest, alleging that my wife had abused her position as a judge to intimidate the HOA. The irony was almost impressive. She attached a demand that all communication go through her attorney and warned me against further escalation. That email was forwarded directly to the clerk's office. Judges recuse. Liars deflect. By the end of the month, the county formally requested sworn statements from everyone involved. The HOA president had to explain where the eviction document came from, who approved it, and why it resembled an official court order. She also had to account for the HOA letterhead, the formatting, and the timeline. The board members were questioned separately. Their stories didn't match hers. Not even close. That's when the cracks turned into fractures. One board member admitted under oath that the president had bragged about scaring me into leaving. Another revealed she'd reused an eviction template she found online and cleaned it up to look more real. Someone else confirmed she'd been warned not to send it and did anyway. Intent was no longer a question. It was documented. Meanwhile, the neighborhood mood shifted. People who'd avoided me before suddenly waved. A few neighbors quietly apologized for believing the rumors. One even told me the president had claimed I was squatting and refusing to comply with the law. Once the truth started leaking out, her authority evaporated fast. HOA power only works when people believe it's legitimate. The final blow came when her own attorney withdrew. According to a board email accidentally sent to the entire community, counsel cited irreconcilable differences and ethical concerns. That's legal language for "I'm not going down with you." From that moment on, everyone knew this wasn't ending quietly. The woman who'd tried to throw me out of my own home was now fighting to keep her position, her reputation, and possibly her freedom. And the case hadn't even reached its most public stage yet. The public stage arrived faster than anyone expected. Once the county finalized its review, the matter didn't stay buried in paperwork. It moved into daylight. A preliminary hearing was scheduled to address whether the HOA president's actions constituted impersonation of a court authority and falsification of legal documents. That single phrase alone was enough to send shockwaves through the neighborhood. People who'd never attended an HOA meeting in their lives suddenly knew the date, the time, and the courtroom number. The president didn't show up to the clubhouse anymore. Her once constant emails stopped. Even the HOA website quietly removed her name from the leadership page, replacing it with a vague acting chair. That move alone told everyone what was coming. You don't erase someone unless you're trying to get distance fast. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was fuller than I expected. A few board members sat stiffly together, whispering. Two neighbors I recognized avoided eye contact. The HOA president arrived late, flanked by a new attorney, her confidence visibly shaken. Gone was the smug posture, the crossed arms, the practiced smirk. She looked smaller, cautious, like someone realizing too late that intimidation doesn't work on institutions that keep records. My wife wasn't presiding, of course. She'd formally recused herself the moment the case crossed into judicial territory, exactly as the rules require. That detail mattered. It stripped away the HOA president's favorite talking point and left her standing on nothing but her own actions. The judge assigned to the case was methodical, calm, and clearly unimpressed by theatrics. When the eviction notice was entered into evidence, the room shifted. The judge examined it closely, page by page, asking precise questions about its origin. Who drafted it? Who approved it? Why did it contain language exclusive to court-issued orders? The HOA president's answers were hesitant, inconsistent, and contradicted by prior statements. Each pause felt heavier than the last. Then came the testimony from the board members. One by one, they distanced themselves from her decisions. They claimed ignorance. They cited objections. They described warnings they'd given her that she'd ignored. It was painfully clear she'd assumed the HOA's authority was limitless, and that no one would ever challenge it. She was wrong on both counts. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He explained, slowly and clearly, that private organizations cannot fabricate legal documents to coerce homeowners. That intent matters. That intimidation, even without enforcement, carries consequences. And that misuse of legal imagery erodes trust in the justice system itself. By the time he finished, the HOA president looked like she wished the floor would open beneath her chair. Outside the courtroom, the mood was electric. Words spread quickly. Phones came out. Neighbors who'd once repeated HOA gossip now stood in small clusters, whispering about what they'd just witnessed. The illusion of HOA invincibility was gone. People realized something important. Authority only exists within boundaries, and those boundaries are enforced by law, not confidence. By the end of the week, the HOA called a special community meeting. Attendance was higher than ever. The board announced an internal investigation, a freeze on enforcement actions, and a pending vote to remove the president permanently. They spoke carefully, choosing every word like it might be used against them later. No one interrupted. No one needed to, because at that point everyone understood the truth. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about power, abuse, and what happens when someone mistakes control for immunity. And the final consequences were just around the corner. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in layers, quiet, official, and irreversible. Within 10 days of the hearing, the HOA president formally resigned. The announcement was brief, carefully worded, and framed as a personal decision, but nobody bought it. The timing said everything. The board followed up by voting to remove her entirely from any advisory role and issued a public apology to the neighborhood for procedural overreach. That was the politest way they could describe fraud, without saying the word. Then the legal consequences landed. The county prosecutor declined to pursue jail time, citing first offense status, but filed civil penalties and sanctions related to impersonation of court authority and distribution of fraudulent legal documents. She was fined heavily, barred from serving on any HOA board in the county for 10 years, and required to complete ethics and governance training as part of the settlement. Her attorney called it a resolution. She called it devastating. The HOA itself didn't escape unscathed. Several homeowners, emboldened by what they'd seen, requested audits of past enforcement actions. Fines were overturned. Liens were quietly withdrawn. The board hired an outside management company and rewrote its bylaws to strip the president's role of unilateral power. Monthly meetings suddenly became transparent, recorded, and open to questions. Fear was replaced with something the HOA hadn't had in years: accountability. As for the fake eviction, it vanished. The HOA issued a written statement confirming that no eviction had ever been valid, filed, or enforceable. They mailed it to every resident. My name was cleared in black and white. Neighbors who'd once avoided me now stopped to apologize. Some admitted they'd received similar threats in the past, but were too scared to push back. Seeing one person stand firm changed everything. At home, life went back to normal. The house stayed exactly where it was. The mailbox stopped bringing threats and started bringing newsletters again. My wife returned to her work, her role never questioned, her conduct never challenged. She hadn't used her position to protect me. She'd used the system exactly as it was designed to be used. And that distinction protected both of us. The former HOA president moved away a few months later. Her house sold below market value. No farewell email. No explanation. Just gone. People still talk about her sometimes, usually as a cautionary tale. The woman who thought authority meant unchecked power and who learned, publicly, that pretending to be the law is far worse than breaking HOA rules. Looking back, the lesson was simple. Paper only has power when it's real. Fear only works when you don't question it. And the moment someone tries to scare you with authority they don't actually have, that's the moment they've already lost. Because confidence isn't control, and intimidation isn't law.